Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at KO-online.com. Hello and welcome to the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette. As we do every week, a brand new guest, a different style of martial arts, and hearing their story and kind of what got them into it and what they're doing now. And today's guest, this is going to be a fun one, I think. Now, this guest is not only is he a 7th degree black belt in American Kenpo, he's also a boxer. He won the 2004 Super Welterweight Masters Boxing Division in Costa Mesa and also won 4 USA Masters Boxing World Championships. And since his retirement has been a promoter for the USA Masters Championships in Las Vegas and Los Angeles. But beyond that, he's also very well known as a award-winning stuntman, stunt coordinator, actor, director, author, helicopter pilot, aerial coordinator with over 700 feature films to his credit, including movies like Men in Black, Dunkirk, The Dark Knight, and more. Please welcome to the show today, Rick Avery. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, after that introduction, can we just end it on that note? Because I think the only thing that could happen now is for me to screw everything up.
There was a lot more I wanted to add, but I couldn't write that fast. So you led quite the life, and I'm excited to hear a little bit about it. But
I've been a very, very fortunate man. Very fortunate.
Well, as this is being, a martial arts show, and we'll get to a lot of the other stuff too. I'd like to just kind of go back to the beginning, like I do with all my guests, and talk about what first got you into martial arts, what piqued that interest, and kind of talk about what got you going on your martial arts journey in your life.
Well, I started when it was fairly new to North America. I was serving in the Army overseas, and my sergeant was a Taekwondo practitioner, and he took me off to the side one day after I saw him doing these strange moves, asked him what it was, and he taught me a basic snap kick and the basic blocks and a punch. Not much, but it was my first exposure to something that was very odd to me, very new to me. When I got discharged from the service, I immediately started looking for schools to go train. And there was one school in Santa Barbara where I lived. It was a Kenpo school. Paul Wagner was the person who owned the school. And I started to train with him. I walked into the school one day and saw these people doing katas, and it just grabbed me immediately. I started training with Paul, and he eventually sold me that school after I got my black belt, and for $1,000.
Oh, wow. That's a bargain.
It was a bargain. It broke my mother's heart, though, because I quit college with 6 months to go. I was going to Cal Poly and driving back and forth from San Luis Obispo to Santa Barbara. And she said, "You're going to quit college to buy a karate school?" And I did, and it broke her heart. But to tell you something that's extremely moving to me, I went back to college after 50 years and graduated 6 months ago and got my bachelor's degree. So what was really interesting, it was on Mother's Day.
Oh, wow.
So if she was watching, I finally made her happy.
That's really cool. That's a kind of inspiring story. I mean,
Well, it's something to do during the pandemic, you see.
Oh, I suppose. Yeah. Nice. So what was it about those first few classes that made you want to stick with it? What really grabbed you with martial arts and obviously made it become a part of your life for all these years?
Well, I had never seen movement like that. And the practitioners that I saw at the time, they were purple belts and blue belts, but I was fortunate enough to see two guys practicing that had these beautiful Chinese moves, not typical of an Ed Parker movement. It was a Tracy school at the time, but the way that these two guys were doing their interpretive katas was more of a soft style kung fu, still doing Kenpo katas, but it was just gorgeous and beautiful. And I never thought that I would be able to emulate or do any type of movement like that. I think that someone said at one time, anyone who walks into a martial arts school has a fear in their mind. That's why they walk in the first place. So I think the first thing I had to do was say, yeah, I was a skinny little kid growing up, and obviously I needed some confidence, and this was a way to get it. But that wasn't what drew me to it initially. It was the beauty of the movement. And since then, of course, I owe everything in my life to gaining confidence and the abilities that it's given to me.
So what was it about competition? What drew you to competition? I'm assuming that obviously wasn't even in your mind when you first stepped into those doors. So what made competition jump out at you?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I don't know. Scientifically, I guess I've got that risk gene. There's a gene that scientists have identified. They call it the risk gene, or the A personality. Skiers have it, boxers have it, football players, anybody who takes a small amount of risk to do things is both blessed and cursed to have this gene. And I don't know why I decided to go in and start competing, but I did. And I was fairly successful in it, and took it to all different types of levels in my life. Obviously, it's something that drives me. I'm a goal-oriented person who, once he decides to do something, I go for it full bore, and then I don't let go of it. I keep it for the rest of my life. So yeah, like I said, it's a blessing and a curse. So that's probably why I started competing. I don't know. It was so long ago, I can't remember.
Do you remember your first competition?
I do. I was a blue belt, and I don't have very many pictures at all from back then, but I do have a picture of my first fight. My hair is all wild, and I'm throwing a reverse punch, and yeah, I do remember that first one. I remember not being in the best of shape, not knowing what to look for and how to plan on it, and I was able to win at that level. It was a lower level, but still, I do remember that.
Yeah, that first win always feels good. Obviously, you definitely remember that one. Before we started recording, we talked a little bit about some of your fights, and you've fought some pretty well-known people, at least within the martial arts world. Talk about some of those big ones that stand out. Some of those, obviously, you mentioned some that didn't end the way you wanted and whatnot. But who are some of those memorable fights you remember?
Well, I fought with Benny Urquidez, who's a very, very close friend of mine. He and his wife Sarah. I fought him at the San Fernando Championships. I lost after 3 overtimes. His whole family was there, and we talked about it. I used to have a podcast show myself years ago, and I had him on the show, and we talked about it. And Donnie Williams, he kicked I don't know what kind of language, but he literally kicked my ass. The strongest kicker I ever went up against. Steve Fisher, who's an old legend in the old days, he tricked me. We trained together a lot, and we used to spar a lot together. And I used to have this hook crescent fake and then roundhouse kick to the head. And we were down in the championship in Compton, and we were fighting for the final match for the grand champion. And Steve remembered that move, and there was a picture in one of the karate magazines of him kicking up underneath my kick and getting me. So
Nice.
I love him to death. Steve Fisher was one of the greatest ever. Joe Louis was my mentor, and he taught me how to fight. And I actually had to fight Joe Louis for my black belt. It was part of the test.
Really?
And yeah. So I guess that maybe would have been the hardest.
Talk about a legend, man. I mean, even people who aren't martial arts fans, I think, know who Joe Louis is. I mean, the guy was I met him. I got to meet him back in, was it 1992 or 1993 at the Diamond Nationals in Minnesota. He was there signing autographs and taking pictures. So I got somewhere in one of my boxes, I got a picture with me and Joe Louis. So that was pretty cool.
He was one of the greatest influences in my life, and was a real confidence builder, and taught me to believe in myself a lot. Not only me, but so many thousands of other people. And he was one of the few people who ever stood next to me that I felt intimidated by.
Really?
Yeah. But one of the kindest, most educated, insightful martial artists that ever walked the earth.
Okay. I've actually heard that from a lot of people, and he was just literally a genius. So
yes, very much so.
That's cool. So obviously you decided to make martial arts part of your life. You said you bought the school, and at one point you were running 2 schools, weren't you?
Yeah, I had a school in Goleta, which is a nearby city next to Santa Barbara, and it was doing really well. It was actually doing better than my own school, but I just didn't have time. So I eventually got rid of that school. I had a manager. I just didn't have enough people to run it.
Okay.
So it was doing really well, but I just didn't have the time for the two.
Now, you obviously used martial arts to kind of, I don't know if you really used it to propel your career, but obviously it definitely became an important part of what become your career for decades. Kind of talk about how that happened. How did the whole stuntman thing, what came first? Was the stuntman thing come first? Was it the acting? What came first? And obviously, like I said, martial arts definitely played a big part in that and still does.
Well, I had trained for about 4 years driving from Santa Barbara to Los Angeles to try to be a stuntman with a man named Kim Kahana, who was an established stuntman at the time. And he had a little bit of a school, learned how to do little, 2-punch fights and 20-foot high falls and that type of thing. But I was totally unsuccessful in as much as getting into the industry. I couldn't get my SAG card. I didn't know the right people. So I gave up and I became a cop. And while being a policeman, one night I had a call to, and this is all in the book, I had a call to find somebody who had their car vandalized. I couldn't find the car. It was a white Jaguar, as it turns out. So I called the station. This is before cell phones. So I had to get a dime out and call the station. And Officer Fratilla told me, no, you don't understand. This is the RP, the reporting party, is John Travolta. And at the time, John was the biggest star in the world. He had just done Saturday Night Fever.
Okay.
And talk about how fate or making a left turn instead of a right turn or getting in your car 2 seconds later and things happen is what happened to me on that night, because I got in the car. I made a right turn onto the main street. And the first red light I pulled up to, I looked to my left and there was the white Jaguar. Nice. So, I pulled him over, and John was with a friend of his. His name was Jerry Worms, an old school friend. And I asked him what happened. He said, well, a fan jumped on one of my cars and bent the windshield wiper. What should I do in the future? And I said, well, isn't this your bodyguard? And he said, no, this is an old school friend who later became a cop. And he said, do you know anybody that can help me with that? And I said, yeah, I think you should travel with somebody. It was Christmas time. And he said, well, do you have any recommendations? And I said, yeah, here's my card. And so I gave him my card. And he said, send a resume up to the ranch, which was just outside of Santa Barbara. So I didn't know what a resume was. I had my brother-in-law, an attorney, write a resume for me. And I delivered it to the house. And I didn't hear from John for about a year. And then his attorney, Fred Gaines, gave me a call a year later because his mother and his girlfriend both died that year. So he was in seclusion, and said that he wanted me to be John's person in charge of all of his security. So I hired a bunch of off-duty cops, and we had round the clock on his house, and on important things like the Golden Globes or the Oscars, I would escort John myself personally. Wow. One night I was watching television, and Hal Needham, the legendary stuntman, was on TV, and the housekeeper was sitting there with me. And I said, yeah, I've been trying to do that forever. I would love to be a stuntman like that. And she told John that night. And the next night he said, why don't you have dinner with me? And he said, you look a lot like me. And I think that being a cop is really dangerous, notwithstanding stunt work. And I want you to be my stuntman from now on. So in 1980, I worked on it was my second movie, and was John's stunt double on a movie called Blowout.
Wow. So how many times did you end up stunt doubling for John Travolta then?
I doubled him for about 10 years.
Wow.
Pulp Fiction came around, and I got the call to double him. And at that point, I was already stunt coordinating, and I had 30 stuntmen and women working for me on a movie called Beverly Hills Cop 3 with Eddie Murphy. And I couldn't make the day to go down and double John. And that was the end of that career. It upset him a little bit, but it's really funny. I doubled Robert De Niro now. Bob and I have worked on over 10 feature films together. We got a couple more coming up this year. And we did a movie that nobody saw called Killing Season, starring John and Bob. And I got a chance to, mend the bridges, if you would.
Okay. Wow. That's actually really cool. I mean, that's, De Niro. I mean, talk about two legends in Hollywood. And
yeah, I'm a fortunate guy.
And I'm assuming now, after this many years, what's the worst injury you've had? Kind of curious.
I was thinking about that the other day. I've never been carted off to the hospital, but
Wow.
I've had 3 knee surgeries, broken ankles, rotator cuff surgery, hand surgery. My hand's been broken a number of times. I don't know. Wear and tear for 40 years of stunt work and
Right.
50 years of martial arts and boxing. I'm doing really well.
Question then, has your worst injury been from being a stuntman or being a martial artist? What's been your worst one?
That's a very interesting question. The 3 knee surgeries I have go way back to my green belt test when I tore a meniscus in my knee. And instead of quitting the test, I got some gaffer tape and taped up my knee
Wow.
and finished the test, and then never went to a doctor. I didn't know back then that I had really done that much damage. So a few years later, when I was a policeman, it finally gave out and I had to have my first surgery. So I would say that a combination of the two, one led to the other. But even at my age, with I'm still doing these silly Home Alone gags, doubling Bob. We just did a movie called The War with Grandpa, where I had to do these stupid, silly falling off a ladder off 2 stories and throwing my legs up in the air, slipping on marbles. And you know what? I got to tell you this. Years ago, people would come to me and say, wow, stunt work, that's really crazy, man. You guys are crazy. We had a guy come into our stunt office one day, and he had a basket full of tickets to prove how crazy he was, traffic tickets. He said, I'm crazy. I can do this stuff. And I used to argue the fact. I used to say, no, we're all trained athletes. We rehearse. We take all of the safest precautions that we can. But if you ask me today about it, it's freaking nuts. Throwing yourself down a flight of stairs on fire makes no sense at all. And it's crazy. And I don't know what drives us to do it. We would do it for free. Not anymore, but
right.
It's a crazy, crazy way to make a living.
Something I've always wanted to ask a stunt person, nothing to do with martial arts at all, but I'm curious, either you yourself or do you know any stunt people who actually enjoyed the TV series The Fall Guy in the 80s?
I worked on The Fall Guy.
Did you?
Yeah, I have a number of episodes on The Fall Guy, and it was the greatest show to work on. Mickey Gilbert was the stunt coordinator,
okay,
and his sons were the assistant coordinators. And it was the greatest show for stunt people because at the time, the scripts just had nonsensical stunts in them. So we would be crashing cars and jumping cars and doing the craziest stuff just because that's what the script called for. And this is back in the golden age of television, when we were all working on shows like Riptide and Knight Rider and the A-Team. And the 1980s was the best years to be in the stunt business.
Nice. Yeah, I know for years, I mean, I watched that as a kid, and for years I thought that's realistic. I thought that's what a stuntman was. It had, just like that TV show. I thought it was like almost a documentary probably when I was that age. So,
well, I tell you what, I have to push my buddy's movie. There's a movie coming out. It just got bought by Disney. It'll be on Netflix. It's called Stuntman, The Face You Never See. And my buddy Eddie Braun is I guess you could call it the star. It's a documentary. And if you want to see what it's like to be a stuntman, a real movie about what it's like, you got to see that on Netflix.
Cool. I just wrote that down. I will be checking that out when it comes out. That's kind of cool. Got to ask now, obviously we talked a little bit too. You mentioned the book a little bit. How did that come about? Obviously I know when I interviewed Tom Bleeker, he actually talked about the book a little bit, but I'd love to have you talk about, was it your idea? Was it Tom's idea? And how did that kind of come together? For
years and years, I've done so many, as you mentioned in the introduction, I've done so many different types of careers that all melded into one. People would always say to me, oh, you should write a book. You should write a book. Yeah, you should write a book. And so over 10 years, I would make notes when I had time, and I never got over 50 pages and just gave up. And then I met Tom, who's a writer of many books, and we had lunch one day and he agreed to help me write it. And so he would come to my house every couple of weeks or so, and we would sit for a number of hours, and he would record discussions, and he would ask me questions, and eventually with the combination of both of our writing skills, we put together this book. It's called A Life at Risk.
And I will definitely add a link to that. I'm assuming Amazon. Can you get that off your website too?
You can get it at Amazon, and you can get a signed copy from me if you want one by just going to my email, which is rickavery8@gmail.
All right, write that down, and we will post that also. Because yeah, I was actually going to order mine on Amazon, but I think I'd rather have an autographed copy. So
There, there you go.
that would be cool. I will definitely look at that. And one of the things about the stunt world, I just wanted to mention that I was just reading through your bio on your website, and it mentions that you're in the Guinness Book of World Record. So let's talk about that just a little bit. That's kind of interesting what you're in there for.
Well, I did a lot of John Landis movies after The Twilight Zone, not before. And so he gave me a call. He had directed the Blues Brothers movie, and then he got signed on to do the Blues Brothers 2000 movie. And we did it up in Canada, in Toronto. And at one point when we were in pre-production, he came into the office. He said, Rick, I realized all of the car stunts we had in Blues Brothers, we hardly have anything in this one, and people are going to want to see it. So why don't you set up a car crash with about, I don't know, a dozen cars? So I said, okay, no problem, John. What causes the crash? Well, let's just have a cement layer in a highway that they run into. And so I started designing this gag. And then every few days, John would stick his nose into my office in pre-production and say, make it 10 cars. Then it would be, and now I'm just gleeful because my stuntmen are going to make a lot of money. We're all going to do really well. Then he'd stick his nose in again, make it 20 cars. It ended up being 54 cars.
Wow.
People who see the movie today, and not many people saw it back then, it was not a successful movie at the time. They look at it now because of CGI and they think all of this wreck is CGI. No, there was a driver in every single car. I even drove 3 of the pipe ramps myself because we ran out of drivers. They got knocked up so bad. So in the end, we did 10 car jumps and 30, we did 10 car crashes that started a small pile into the cement paver. And then we did 10 car jumps. And then the rest are all giant pipe ramps done at 50 to 60 miles an hour. It's an audaciously huge and the largest car wreck in history. And that's how we made it to the Guinness World Book.
Wow. So do you know what the second one is? What movie did you beat to get it?
It probably was the first Blues Brothers.
Okay.
I'm guessing. Someone told me there's another movie out that eventually beat us since then. Okay. I'm not sure what that would be. Might be one of the, I'm not sure which one that would be.
To do some research on that one. So that'd be interesting. And of course we got to mention, I mentioned the boxing a little bit. Now, how did that come about? Because obviously did you box when you were younger, or did that all kind of happen when you were older?
It happened when I was older. I was a kickboxer, of course, when I had my school, and we started out back then with points, and eventually June Reed came out with the karate chops, as they would call it. And then we started to be able to make contact. Later on in life, I just started to take on some boxing skills. And for the movies, specifically, there was a movie called Grudge Match with Sylvester Stallone and Bob.
Yep.
Bobby De Niro. And so that kind of upped the ante for me because I had to choreograph with Rob Sally all of Bob's moves that he needed to do. And then after that, I was contacted by a director who wanted to do a movie in Panama called The Roberto Duran Story, which is called Hands of Stone. So I was the stunt coordinator, second unit director, and fight trainer for that movie and got really into doing it an awful lot. A friend of mine told me about Masters Boxing. So USA Boxing is the same organization that puts on the Golden Gloves and the Silver Gloves. They also have something called Masters Boxing, and it's for all amateurs 35 years and older. So I decided to test myself. I wanted to know how I would stand up to other guys my age in the world. So I started training and started boxing, and I was very successful in winning a number of world championships with it. Since then, I've retired, and now I'm a promoter of Masters Boxing, and we have 2 events, one in Las Vegas and one in Los Angeles.
So what is it like being a promoter? I've worked with a lot of promoters. I used to judge MMA fights, so I've worked with a lot of promoters on the side. And what are some of the challenges, compared to being a competitor, that you see as the promoter side?
That's a good question too. I used to have a radio show, and I used to say, when they'd say, that's a good question, I would say, of course. That's what I do. The the first promotion that I did was for ESPN. And if you recall, back then they had the PKA, or the Professional Karate Association.
Yep.
And so I put on 2 events in Santa Barbara. One of them was televised. And one of the fighters we didn't know had epilepsy, and he got knocked out during one of the fights and had an epileptic attack, and they had to take him out. And I felt such guilt and such remorse for being the promoter of that event that I never did it again. Since that time, and over a period of maturation, I realized that we as fighters, boxers, martial arts, MMA people, love what we do. We want to do it. And so my job now, my partner's name is Manny Fernandez, and we look out for the best events that we could put on for our boxers. We love our boxers. Las Vegas event already has 200 boxers signed up for it in April. And, we put one on there last year, and they were so happy that boxers were putting on a boxing event that it's grown much, much bigger each year. So as a promoter, I had guilt at first, but now I have pride with it.
Now, you mentioned MMA a little bit, so I'm just kind of curious now, as someone with a traditional martial arts background, but you also did kickboxing, you did boxing. What are your thoughts on MMA and the whole, how that's kind of engulfed the martial arts world over the past, 30 years almost?
I will repeat, since you said you're going to talk to Benny or Keaties one of these days, I'd love for you to ask him that question, because this is what he's going to say to you. I hate that the Bushido portion of the martial arts is lost in it. I admire MMA fighters. I think they're fantastic. They put it is tough. I wrestled in high school, so I know how hard it is to be on the ground, rolling around, as well as stand-up fighting. And these guys are in phenomenal shape. Listen, fighters are heroes in as much as you're in a sport that can embarrass you. You go out into a ring, watched by observers. Usually you're half naked, and you have a possibility of being knocked out and only a 50% possibility of winning. It's the hardest thing in the world to do. So I lost my train of thought talking about that. But the Bushido, it started out as a martial arts kind of show, if you would, or a runoff from the martial arts. And it has since then lost. The Gracie brothers have left it. You don't see people in gis anymore. And of course, you wouldn't wear them anymore.
Right.
But ask Benny, and Benny will tell you the same thing. I just wish that there was more Bushido and honor in as much as presenting the martial arts attitude back into the ring with it, rather than the show that is being put on right now. And that's not to say I don't admire every single fighter.
Right. That's actually kind of funny you mentioned that, because like I said, I used to judge professional MMA, and that's one thing as a judge that I always impressed me about the fighters is, maybe there's 20 fighters on a card, and you'd have 4 or 5 of them that would actually bow when they went into the cage, and they bow to their opponent, they bow afterwards. And it's like, so it's not completely lost, but I definitely see what you mean. Obviously it's nowhere near where it probably where we wish it could be, but it's good that there's still a handful that still show that respect and still do that. I mean, some of the traditionalists and whatnot, but yeah, definitely far and few between, unfortunately.
Yeah, and don't take it from me. Take it from the greatest fighter who ever lived, and that was Benny. And he'll give you a long speech about it.
I'm looking forward to that. So obviously, like I said, lifelong martial artist. You even wrestling in high school, and wrestling as so you've been around martial arts and combative sports your whole life. Is there a philosophy, maybe 1 or 2, or something really important that you learned from martial arts that you hold true to your heart and kind of come back to every now and then?
I would say is never underestimate your opponent. You never know. Back when we started martial arts, it was like having a weapon, truly having a weapon. Nobody knew how to use feet for kicks. I actually had a father come into my dojo one day and refused to have his son train with me because he was used to John Wayne movies and only the bad guy used his foot. He called it dirty fighting. Wow. So back then, actually, I came out on top of my class. I was number 1 cadet as a policeman, but I was told later that they really scrutinized me. They watched me because I was a black belt, and they weren't sure of what a black belt would do. And they through my rookie year, they really paid attention to what my attitude was going to be. So yeah, it's different now. You don't know who you would square up in the street. Back then, there was so few martial artists that if you got into a fighting stance in the street and the other guy got in a fighting stance, you'd probably shake hands. But now everybody knows a little bit. And the only thing that separates us all, as far as the philosophy is concerned, is the spirit of the Bushido that I spoke of. As long as that spirit is kept alive by the instructors, to bow to your opponent, to respect your opponent, to walk away from the fight when you can, to be the stronger individual, that would be my philosophy.
In your opinion, do you think, I know this is something I've always thought myself, do you think everyone should try martial arts at least some point in their life?
I think that anybody who takes the martial arts will get something out of it. Anybody. I don't think it's for everybody, truly. I used to give introductory courses just to try it out with a few lessons. And I also found that over the years, and I'm not saying it was because of my instructional ability, it's just a statistic that's kept from martial arts schools, but 80% of the people who take martial arts don't come back and don't maintain it. So it takes a lot of work. And some people just don't have the sensibility for, doing a movement. Some people shy away from, oh, you want me to hit that guy in the throat? They shy away from that. So I think everybody who would take it would get something from it. But I don't know that everybody is in the position that they would get it, would want to take it.
It makes sense. So as an instructor and stuff, if someone were to approach you, whether a friend or just a colleague, and show interest in martial arts, that either they wanted to join themselves or maybe they're thinking of getting their kids into it, what advice would you give them as far as what to look for in a school, what to look for in an instructor?
Yeah. I would say first, don't sign up at the first school you go to. It might be the best school, but you should go visit every school in your neighborhood, even if you have to drive a little bit. You'll get a feeling of home at the right school, and watch your potential instructor teach, and get an idea of whether you're going to be comfortable with them. There are really bad instructors out there, and there's really good instructors. And then there's mediocre and medium instructors, like in anything else. So my advice would be to check out every school. I'm a helicopter instructor, and I tell all the helicopter pilots who want to train, go to every school. It's a strange feeling when you walk into a martial arts school. You identify with the first person who shakes your hand, and you gravitate towards that first person. And it's the same thing in flying. You gravitate to your first instructor, and that could be a good thing, and it could be a bad thing if you hadn't done your research on it.
Very good. Now, obviously, your book is off the table. So, do you have a favorite martial arts book other than your own?
Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee.
Tao Jeet Kune Do, great book. And then kind of wrap it up on a fun one here. 2-part question. Do you have a favorite martial arts TV show and or favorite martial arts movie?
Well, since I coordinated The Perfect Weapon, I'd have to drop that for a second. It's a timely thing. I would say that my favorite martial arts show right now is The Warrior, or I think that's what it's called.
Yep. Yeah. The Bruce Lee. Yep.
Yeah. The fighting stuff that they do in there is fantastic. And back in the old days, just because of the spirituality of it, I like the old Kung Fu series, which I got a chance to work on.
Oh, okay. Okay. Did you ever get to work on the new one, the spinoff? Was it the Legend Continues?
Yes, that's the one I worked on.
Oh,
Did it up in Canada. Yeah.
Very cool. That was a fun one too. And I love Perfect Weapons, the reason I learned about American Kenpo. So thank you for that. that's still one of my all-time favorite movies. And one other thing I forgot to ask. So obviously you've been around a lot of martial artists. I know you kind of talked about Joe Louis. If you had to pick, one or two martial artists throughout your life that you really admire, really look up to, I'm assuming Joe Louis is probably one of them, but is there another one also?
I would say Joe, and I would say Benny.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'd have to throw in Steve Fisher.
Okay. That's you mentioned he's one of the ones you fought, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Awesome. Cool. Well, Rick, this has been fun. It's been cool. You obviously led an amazing life, and I'm definitely ordering the book. I want to check it out for sure. And I will put the link in the notes for everyone to check out. And it's amazing you've been doing it this long and you're still doing this. And I'm definitely going to check out that movie you mentioned, the Stuntman, The Face You Never See. I wrote that one down, and I'll be watching for that when it comes out on Netflix for sure. Any last minute, parting words, anything else you want to leave everybody with before I let you go?
No, you made me sound like a hero. I appreciate it.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I'm glad you agreed to do this, and I will let you know when the show is going to air, and we'll be in touch.
Okay, buddy, you be safe.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.